So this place is relatively untouched, not entirely, but it's vandalism. Nobody knows. I mean, a lot of people. Tomasz also says he has no idea, no explanation why they didn't touch it. My shot, I think it works, is that you walk in and it's simply mesmerizing, overwhelming. It's so large you wouldn't even know where to begin to destroy it, so they just didn't touch it. Right? So the Jews covered mace led to go to the cemetery.
These Polish people are crazy. And before you say anything, I'm Polish.
Okay, sorry. Zach was wondering, is this in any case possibly a Chilul Hashem, maybe not a proper thing to do? I'm not sure I don't know what to say exactly. You saw in Lansut, remember at the entrance of the shul? Maybe it's some kind of preservation. In Lansut, I mean, we have a history of desecrated cemeteries. That's our history. The Jews were persecuted, right? And in Lansut, remember, they went to the local cemetery and just all the scraps of whatever remaining tombs are there. There's no cemetery. It's all apartment high rises. So they just brought right to the left of the entrance in the corridor are just old matzevos that they could salvage. If you go to Hebron near Kodesh, who's been in Hebron, second holiest place in the world, so you'll see, for example, if you go to the Beit Hadassah Museum there, they also have fragments of some of the tombs, the memorials that were desecrated by the Arabs between the period after the Jews were kicked out in 29 before they came back in 68. They also tried to scrap it together and create some kind of memorial. That's our existence here. How about we'll go to the Kever Achim. קודם כל, כן. כן, בדיוק.
There are, we just haven't been there yet. There are, we just don't know yet who. Oh.
What is this? This doesn't make sense to me. Like, what is it to do?
You remember it.
Like, it's just weird. Just little memorial. What is this? Like, what's with the rocks? And the
What is this? That in the course in the let me talk to everybody. I can answer everybody as much as I can. And Yola, please correct me and answer and whatever you want to say. So Yola and I were just speaking. This is new from the Corona days. Jews felt that they wanted to do something to commemorate the mass grave that's immediately in front of us here, and so this was built. Its symbolism completely mystifies us. Yola and I have no rhyme. Anybody wants to suggest a pshat what this is all about? I was saying that it comes from that powerless feeling of wanting to do something in the face of tragedy and not knowing what to do, and especially if you don't have Torah, you don't have mitzvahs, you don't have learning, right? So let's just build a thing. Right? You see that today in response to a large degree to October 7th. The profound feeling, especially among secular Israelis, that they want to do something. What that something should be, let's dance again. We'll have a dance-a-thon in commemoration of what happened, as if there's some kind of appropriateness. Okay, I don't know. We're standing then in the presence of a mass grave. Mass grave is not proper covet of mace, but what are we going to do? It's the best in an imperfect world. And I'll recount the story briefly. We hope to end our journey together by the remnant, by one of the remnants at least, of the Warsaw Ghetto itself. Just to remind you, I know some people don't have all this together. You'll please forgive me for bombarding you, and Tomasz, and probably Yola as well today, and Rabbi Marcus, Rabbi Greenwald, with bombarding you with probably way too much information. You realize the idea, part of the idea... What? Okay, oh, that's over there. One of the ideas behind this is that to open you up to learn that there's so much more in the world. I mean, we're not educators, we're not rabbis, we're not parents. If we don't try to do stuff that you would not naturally do on your own, and you think, oh wow, I got to learn more about that. So if it's opened you up on any level, and you want to pursue any of the things we've thrown at you, then something's been very good and has worked. So a ghetto, just to recap, was the Nazi way. It's not a new invention. The Jews have been ghettoized, living in ghettos for centuries. Remember, the term comes from which country?
Italy.
From Italy, right? It's an Italian word. But for the Nazis, it took on a whole new dimension when they tried to get control of some 10 million Jews who lived in Europe before the war. How do you do that? How do you orchestrate such a mass operation? And part of it was simply to take the Jews as spread out as they were with the Enlightenment. Jews moved far and wide. We drove around Poland, maybe you looked around the countryside, villages and towns and big cities, they were everywhere. And how do you find them, first of all? How do you identify them, second of all? And then how do you control them? One of the ways is to stuff them into ghettos. And we talked about the Budapest ghetto the first day, and we mentioned the Krakow ghetto, and there were numerous ghettos. They were vicious, squalid, difficult places. The death rate was very high. Some Lodz, the death rate was much more among inmates than Auschwitz itself, because those who passed the selection in Auschwitz at least were put to work and they were fed something. The chances of survival were much greater. In Lodz, they were simply left to rot.
Where's Lodz?
Lodz is to the, not, I mean, if we could, one year we went there, after Warsaw, we went due west and went sort of a little southwest of Warsaw, but not close enough by far to go visit. It was a major Jewish center with a brutal, Chaim Rumkowski, a brutal Jewish head of the ghetto. It was not anybody's envy to be the head of the ghetto. Perhaps your survival rate in this world was longer, but the conscience, what it did to a person. In this event, the head of the Warsaw ghetto, Warsaw being one of the large ghettos, a mass area of concentration of Jews before they were shipped off to various camps, mostly death camps. The Warsaw ghetto, overwhelmingly, not entirely, but overwhelmingly, the people were shipped systematically just north of here to Treblinka, where we stood last year. And Treblinka was a one-way stop, and in an area, correct me, Shana Gimel, in an area about as far as what we can see right here in the basic Pharos, in our current view, not counting the trees behind here. That was the area that remains of the camp that almost 1 million people met their end, and mostly from Warsaw.
It was in a year, no? The whole camp was only...
It was a little bit more, but do you know the number? Treblinka?
Treblinka was a bit more.
Yeah, it was over a couple of years, but so what? Yeah, I mean the idea is still overwhelming. Anyway, I was starting to say the head of the Warsaw Ghetto was a figure named Adam Chernovsky, who himself, overwhelmed with the enormity. I mean, he was charged by the Nazis with running the ghetto with no supplies, no ability to really care for the Jews who were inside, and then with the fateful decision of having to decide who goes on the list of shipments on the train rides to what was already becoming increasingly clear was to their deaths. Even though the Nazis tried to keep up the lie, no, you're going to work camps, you'll be okay, to facilitate, as we've been talking about. He, we don't know his reasons, we don't know what brings a person to this, on Tisha B'Av of all days committed suicide. And is also somewhere, his remains, who knows, possibly here, possibly in the remains of the Warsaw Ghetto. He was the head of the Warsaw Ghetto, Adam Chernovsky.
Just simply the Tisha B'Av was the first day of the first shipment to Treblinka. And Adam Chernovsky has been asked by the SS to make a list of the people to be on these trains. And he said, I am not able to put the people on the dead, because by that he already knew that this would be the death camp. So he decided to commit suicide.
Not to be the one to make that decision.
Exactly.
Yosef Yavni, you asked a question about that.
Yes.
If you're a capo, did you have to die? Yerag vel Yavor. Right, these are the questions, fateful questions that the people faced.
Who's the Rav then?
There were really several Rebbeim. We'll talk about them now. One of the Rebbeim I'll talk about first. I don't mind if you talk, as we always said. If you do me a favor, though, it kind of like just affects the whole dynamic. If you're talking on the fringes, go far away out of ear reach so that you can do your thing, which is totally fine. But it bothers us if you're talking. Well, no, before the Piaseczner, actually, the Piaseczner was not really the head of. There was a rabbinic figurehead position in the ghetto, and the major name is Rav Menachem Ziemba, who was a giant in Torah. He wrote, among many of his Sfarim, he wrote a book called the Machazeh HaMelech, a Perush, apparently, we wouldn't know, but apparently a commentary, one of the grand commentaries on the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. And like so many other inhabitants of the ghetto, it too went up in flames. We don't have it. One of our tragedies. When a Sefer Torah goes up, we fast. It's like a human being just died. And he was in charge. He was in a figurehead position in the ghetto. And I'll back up a little bit. Let me first, before I talk about Rav Ziemba and the other iconic figures, I have three that I want to talk about here. So let me just give you an overview. Maybe it's a familiar story. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising happened near the end, in the spring of 1943, as the ghetto had been, to use the Nazi term, liquefied. They used these dehumanizing terms like liquidation and extermination, so as to make it sound more sanitary. And at this point already, it was fairly clear what was happening, and the Jews decided to smuggle in arms, to take up guns, and they led an uprising from the beginning of Pesach throughout Pesach. People recount how during the Leila Seder, whatever the scraps they could put together of matzah and maror. Maror was actually easy to find in those days, but matzah and charos is less so. But whatever they could do, they made a Seder, and people recount they as they were saying over from memory the Haggadah, red glow bounced off people's face from the various fires in all the buildings that were burning from the Nazi bombardment. The uprising ended as was expected. The Nazis had planned to completely destroy the ghetto and empty it of the Jews as a birthday present to the Fuhrer, whose birthday was April 18th, and they didn't quite make good on that. But they ultimately crushed the uprising, and the Jews were murdered, and there was a massacre as predicted, and those who were found were shipped off to Treblinka, and we don't know where are the dead bodies, what happened to them, and so they were brought eventually for a group burial. Who actually is here? Kadosh Baruch Hu as Rachmanus, and will take care of us in Tchias HaMesim, and those worthy will certainly be will be counted. The story of Rav Menachem Ziemba is actually a little different.
How many people are there then?
We can estimate. Do you have a number?
Yes. I am not going to.
But I don't think anybody can. Nobody knows. You heard already my presentation. I should say also, I mean, just so you know, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, I think I mentioned this earlier, this trip, for the secular Israelis who come here, it's overwhelming, but in a way perhaps it's different than for us, because part of the narrative of, if you studied Zionism in school, is that we will rise up and after centuries of persecution, we'll form a militia, we'll fight. In the early artist work, there's the famous Israeli artist named Rappaport, who has those models. Perhaps you've been to Yad Vashem, you see them, of the robust Israeli, muscles bulging in shorts and sandals, right? He's the guy, right? And that the idea that the Jews would go like so many passive sheep to the slaughter was unthinkable when it was time early in the state's existence to decide on a date for a Holocaust memorial of some kind. They chose the date around the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, but of course you can't have such a date during Pesach, so they pushed it off a few days after Pesach, if you noticed, and they had that. And I think we mentioned this earlier also. It's problematic from our perspective because there is a Holocaust day, and it's called Tisha B'Av, which is the perpetual day until the temple's rebuilt of all Jewish tragedies. So to say otherwise is a problem for us.
So this mass grave is people from
the Warsaw Ghetto, people whose bodies were found, fragments and whatnot, and ultimately given some semblance of burial. you have mass graves like this.
No
Anybody came with me on the Shabbos a few weeks ago in the old city? Remember how when we left the Batei Machse, right behind the Sephardi Center, and I remember the psukim from Zachariah, the Skenim, Skenos will sit, and then I showed you, these are people in this little corner here who died fighting, defending the old city in 48. Yeah, yes, no, maybe a little bit, right? So they too were not treated with proper kavod, and they were buried en masse hastily while the Jews were having to retreat from the old city. Only after the 6-Day War, when the old city was returned to the Jewish people, did they exhumed the graves and they buried them, if anybody's been there, at the top of Har Hazeisim. So they have a different burial. Also, though, a mass grave because you can't distinguish the bones. Another story of the Lamed Hay, during that same War of Independence, 35 very dynamic young soldiers who were all massacred by Arabs on the way to save Gush Etzion, or they were trying to at least. And there's a famous story of Rav Aryeh Levine doing a Gor Lagra for another time. A lot of mass graves really reflecting our history. So Rav Menachem Zemba and one of the other heads of the Jews, the rabbinic head of the Jews, were actually near the very, very end given an opportunity, an offer to escape. They and their immediate families could run and perhaps have safe passage. Nothing was guaranteed. And he said, no, I don't leave the Jewish people. Their fate is my fate. Yeah, that's not suicide. That's not suicide. Suicide is usher, right? The Chovas Levavos says suicide, arguably not Adam Chernikovsky's suicide. That would be much more in the realm of Kiddush Hashem. But just somebody who throws it in, where the Jews, think about this irony. The Jews is all we can do to live and survive through centuries of this. And for somebody to commit suicide, it's the ultimate statement of kfira, saying as if to Hashem, chas v'shalom, this big mistake. That's not what Rav Ziamba did. Now, who was he? He was a great figure, great Talmid Chacham. During the end, buildings were bombarded, and at one point during the uprising, he was fleeing from one building to the other, and while he was in the road, he was killed. And they hastily buried him in the corner. His entire family were all sent to Treblinka. 1958, 2 nephews survived, knowing the story. After a very, very difficult and extended period, they dug around. The ghetto was a large area, contained a large number of people, so it was packed. But they found his body, they found his remains, and you can visit his new kever in Har Menuchos today. So he's somebody who's not here. Baruch Hashem, he got a proper kfura in Eretz HaKodesh. Misha kavod be'Eretz Yisrael, kilu kavod mitachas kizi hakavod, the Yerushalmi says, as if you're buried under Hashem's mighty throne. The largest Chassidus in Europe prior to the war, we said, was Ger. Second largest, Alexander. Two students really, disciples of Kutzker. The third largest was the Radomsker Rebbe. Radomsk, somebody asked me, right, if it wasn't Kusk, what would I want, which Chassidus? So I said Radomsk. And that's a more layered answer than I have time to give over right now. Why? But the Radomsker Rebbe was a grand figure. All the Radomsker Rebbe's, go look up or ask me to send you, if you're interested, one of the Radomsker Rebbe's explanations of where's Eliyahu Navi nowadays. As what, is he dead? Is he alive? Where does he actually reside? He has a whole explanation based on Psukim and Chazal. So the Radomsker was a huge Chassidus. They had the second largest whole system of education throughout Europe. The Radomsker Rebbe himself was a very, very wealthy man who actually underwrote many of his own institutions with his own money, which is a good way to have it. Because you have it around, you have Balabatim, you have the board of directors, like in the shul this morning, who are going to charge us to Yodavin, and Baruch Hashem, the rabbi had the last word on that we didn't have to pay anything. But in this event, the Radomsker got to call the shots. He had a glass factory and many other interests, and he was, without elaborating too much, because we're going to go to a lot of the Kibbutz Tziddikim, he really was the real deal. Refined, fine, midos, and chokhmah atzum, really on the world-class Talmid Chacham. And at the end, in 1942, during the first Aktun, as they called, the first roundup, They came for the Radomsker. The Nazis knew the rabbis were a life source for the Jews, and they came for him and his wife and his daughter and son-in-law and I think grandchild. And they spoke as the Nazis spoke, and he was not paying them any mind. And he said that said calmly, like a Jew is always calm. That's how you can tell that somebody has bitachon. He says, "Whatever you do, you're going to do, and I'm not going to debase myself to cooperate." And they killed him on the spot, and they killed later the rest of his family. There's no survivors. And Radomsk was one of the Hasidus. You probably haven't heard of it so much because they were virtually wiped out.
My grandfather
Was Radomsk.
His father, who my son's named after, was Rashiva in Radomsk.
Is he a Radomsker Rebbe? Are there Radomsker descendants in your family?
After the war, they got connected to the Klausenberger, to Tzan, Klausenberg.
Sons Klausenberg.
In Borough Park.
In Borough Park. That's what's happened. They've sort of glommed on
They
to
took
others.
care
There
of them.
is a very tiny Hasidus Radomsk in Bnei Brak. In Bnei Brak today, and I guided some very fine Radomski Yidden who are descendants of survivors. But again, it's pittance. It's pittance. There were other groups that were almost wiped out too. Ger was virtually wiped out, and they've rebuilt spectacularly. The largest Hasidus in Eretz Yisrael today. Breslov was hard hit. Belz was hard hit. All rebounding beautifully, and not everybody rebounded.
Alexander?
We don't hear of it today. Here and there. Nothing of great significance. The third name and the last name I'm going to talk about here is perhaps most familiar. Certainly there were a lot of people understandably went, what? Who? On the bus, correctly, because it does elicit that kind of excitement. Eish Chodesh, does that mean anything to anybody? Anybody from the 5 towns here? The Eish Chodesh or Weinberger? Okay, or Weinberger? The Eish Chodesh Shul?
That's
Anybody?
My uncle is the what's it called, the shul? He's the president of the shul.
Oh, wow.
I go there
How
a lot.
Hirschgewitz.
Where did you go?
I go there a lot.
And what do you say about it?
It's a great place.
How? Give us a sense. Like what do you feel there?
I mean, there's a lot of people there. It's a
Very. It's a big draw.
Connected. In what way do you see it's connected?
Everyone sings together. It's a big show. Everyone's
I think
singing
I saw.
together,
Who did I see from Derech there?
dancing together.
Yeah.
I saw someone from. I saw you in Derech.
When we
I was
spent.
there for the weekend, remember?
Oh.
It was my cousin's wedding. No, it was the week before my cousin's wedding. I saw him there. At,
Wow.
I was there for Australia's engagement.
When he comes to visit us, he always goes walks the Aish. It's like an hour and something walk. He always walks there.
It's worth it. It's worth it for the experience, right? A month or two ago, you came to Ramat Beis Shemesh Aleph. So right around the corner where Rav Benish Ginsburg lives, is another center, another Eish Kodesh Shul. And then they're in the world. So the Piaseczner Rebbe was a descendant, Rav Klonimus Kalman Shapira was his name. He was a descendant, get this, of the Noam Elimelech and the Chos of Lublin and the Rebbe of Koznitz. You remember the story. Rav Noam Elimelech was a Rebbe of the Chose, and the Chose somewhat controversially slipped away from the Rebbe, and that was seen that he was accused of being disloyal and starting his own Chassidus in Lublin, as we saw, and his students defended him as following through on the Noam Elimelech's very teachings to spread Chassidus, and that's what he was doing by breaking away. Anyway, they were unified again in the form of the Piaseczner, who was also one of these great. I mean, are you overwhelmed, and you should be, by just the awesomeness of the people that we're meeting? Just for the ages, and they don't make them like this anymore. As much as we're all a bunch of miracles, they were of a different level. And he is known by a number of things. He's known by a wonderful book of Musar. It's a shtickle intense, I have to warn you. The Chovos HaTalmidim. Anybody? You learn the Chovos HaTalmidim?
Yeah, right here. Bunch of them.
Oh, Gewalt. You have any gems to share with us?
That's it. That's all we hear.
On the spot.
You think for a second. I'll give you a couple if you come up with anything great. If not, no problem. Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's a little intense. Some of his ideas.
He just said.
Oh, let's hear. So that's a pasuk. And what does he say about the pasuk? Educate the child based on who the child is.
Based on his ways. Like if you have a kid who he loves Tanakh. He loves to learn all about Chamishei Chumashim Torah. then teach him. Don't force him to go and try to branch out and force him to do things that he won't want to do. You have to teach him according to
Central idea, and it's my association really of the Piaseczner. He says a Rebbe's task is to love his students, to understand, to be yored l'sof datam, is the lashon in Hebrew, to get down into their kishkas, understand who they are, what makes them tick, what makes them work, and then you can teach properly, right? It's a fine line we draw in Derech. We try to speak your language, hopefully not that kind of language, but how do we bridge that, kind of thing. But you hear that this sense of great, what we call with Moshe Rabbeinu, nosaba olim chavero, great empathy. He advocated, he also said that a Rebbe has to demonstrate emotionally, with his life, with his example, the delights of dveikus, of living your life, clinging to HaKadosh Baruch Hu every day. He had a whole daily regimen of what a student should do and how he should organize his life. And in the Warsaw ghetto, I'll finish in a moment. In the Warsaw ghetto, he was there now he had a son and a daughter. In the early days of the fighting, his only son, was killed by a bomb. The Nazis bombed Warsaw. What you see of Warsaw, you see, such a beautiful modern metropolis, because it had to be rebuilt after the war. And the son was killed, and the daughter was later deported to Treblinka, and she died too. There are no descendants. And the Rebbe was just a pistol, a powerhouse. You have to understand, try to picture the squalor of the ghetto, the desperation, the starvation, the lack of medicine, people dying regularly. He administered how many people he went to in their last breaths. But he made sure to help Jews continue living as Jews. He arranged marriages. He got married in the Warsaw ghetto. He arranged them. He found secret women's mikvaos so that the Nazis wouldn't discover them because they were illegal. And he fought. He was a fighter for Hashem. And he taught, and we mentioned this last night, and he got up and he gave powerful, real, resonant discourses, shmuzen, as they called them in Yiddish, on what was going on. He addressed questions of emunah. He said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us. Hashem loves his creations. He loves the Jewish people. He weeps when we weep. He wants what's good for us. And when our enemies fight us, and the Jewish moral conscience, we keep saying in the words of Hitler, that made them feel guilty for trying to lead the pagan life of self-indulgence that they craved, what they were really fighting, said the Piaseczner, their real object of hatred was Hashem himself. He too perished, and Mistama's here. Quickly before the Nazis finished off, he had preserved his writings. He rolled them up in a canister, buried them deep beneath the garbage can. Years after the war, a construction worker was there, found the canister. 1960, as late as 1960, they published his writings under the title Eish Kodesh. Today, of course, one of the great studied works of our people. Jews also have these monumental questions of suffering and righteous people, and Tzadik V'Ralo, Rasha V'Tovlo, and he lives. These figures live. They're radiant for us. Chasoch zroa kodshecha v'karev keit hayshua nekom nikmas damavadecha me'om ha'ashah
Yeah.
Rabbi Bleiweiss, one of the reasons why I mentioned to you on our way in that if we could come this way and pass by the Piaseczner first, come to the Piaseczner Rebbe, is Piaseczner Rebbe is one of those people who may have lived over about 100 years ago, and his writings are about almost 100 years old, a little less, 80 years, 70 years. But I'm saying we're dealing with the last century is my point. His writings, you would think, are old school, but as we're reading just the Hakdama in Shir, and everyone was just taken by his understanding of people down to 2025 almost, literally saying, one second here, you have kochos, you have strengths. Your job in life is to pull out those strengths. Gam ki yaskin lo yasser mimenu, that you're not going to leave them later on. I don't know, my feeling was always like, he was my Zaidi. My grandfather was helping me, not forcing me, not pushing me, not anything, but telling me, bring out those kochos. And we make decisions nowadays, okay, what's going to be for lunch? And then what's going to be for supper? And then what's going to be, where am I going to sleep tomorrow, etc. Huh?
You skip the snacks.
And skip the snacks, right, exactly.
And the nap.
These were people that were looking, when they were talking in whatever it was in the 1900s, early 1900s, they were talking for 100 years from now. They were talking to the future. They were talking to us. They're talking for many years from now of, okay, chinuch is going to continue. One of his major topics is don't be a lecturer. Don't be a pedagogia. Huh? Yeah? Right? Don't be a lecturer. Harkin roshcha. Lean down to listen. Listen to what's going on. Here, though, it may sound sour down below. It may be that the next generation, you can look down and say, this generation, what's going to become of it? Chas v'shalom. That sour seed will later on blossom and turn into that incredible next eights. He talks about his slavos, right? That you should be a shalheves shal eish kodesh. That you got to enlighten, you got to be, mamish, use all those kochos because Kadosh Baruch Hu put us here. We look at history, as I said to you guys in Shir, that mitzad echad, we're but a hiccup in history. If you think about it, 5,000 years, right? Okay, I'm going to live, Bez Hashem, 120, right? But, 70, 80, what is it? What am I going to accomplish? My name's going to be remembered. You look at this cemetery, right? 250,000 people. Not true. Kadosh Baruch Hu put you here. He will never do it. He hasn't done it till now, and he'll never do it again. And that's something that you can go ahead and bring out. The Piaseczner cries that out to us and tells us, every one of you guys, realize who you are. He was here in horrible times, but at the same time, he looked and saw there's going to be a future. He took his stuff and hid it in a canister, as Rabbi Bleiweiss said. He said, no, it's going to be another generation. It's going to be another generation. And that generation is going to be mechanech the next generation. Rabbi Bentley, when we came here 7 years ago, and we had gone through most of the Sefer. Rabbi Bentley literally, right here, fell to the floor. I'm like, you're not bowing down. He goes, no, I'm awestricken. I'm taken. Right here is where, what?
He was a student then.
What? He was a student then. Rabbi Bentley was, right, Yosef Bentley. He said, I'm awestricken. Here's where he's buried, like this, but he's still talking to me till today. He's still alive and with me. He's the one telling me, and this is crazy when he said this then, now thinking about it, he's the one telling me how I have to go ahead and educate the future generation. Pretty incredible when you realize that. And at that time we sang together, and I guess he was referring, we were singing for you guys. Zakeni legadel abanim uvnevanim chachamim ulevanim Harei Hashem yirei Elokim Anshe emes Zera Kadosh B'Hashem Dveikim Zakeni
Yavei Hashem Yirei Elokim Anshe Emes Zera Kodesh Bar Hashem Bekim Umeir Esaolam Atayom Asim Tovim Umecham Meleches Avodas Avoyim Tovim ubechol meleches avodas avoyim umeim esoyam batayom asim tovim ubechol meleches avodas avoyim umeim esoyam
Everyone can join with me. I'd like to say Sher Malas for my own children, my own Talmidim, and for your future children, Bez Hashem, and your future Talmidim, the schus of the Piaseczner, the Rebbe. May he go ahead and help each of us become the proper mechanchim. All of us are going to be mechanchim someday. All of us want to get married. As Hashem, all you should be zocheh to get married. Automatically, that means you're a mechanech because you have a child, and you have to go ahead and give him the chinuch. Should daven that we should properly go ahead and be able to mechanech the next generation. Shir lamaloi sesoina yeleorim me'ayin yavo yezrim. Say Shamayim Orez say Shamayim Ayitain L'may Traglecha Yanum Shaymerecha Ayitain L'may Traglecha Yanum Shaymerecha Hinei Lo Yanum V'lo Yishan Shoymei Yisrael Hinei Lo Yanum V'lo Yishan Shoymei Yisrael Avinai Shaymerecha Avinai Tzilcha Yad Yaminecha Avinai Shaymerecha Avinai Tzilcha Yad Yaminecha Shemesh lo yakeh kol yareach v'loyla Adonai yishmarcha mikol ra Yishmar es nafshecha Adonai yishmar tzeischa uvoyecha me'ata v'yad olam
Adonai yishmor tzeischa uvoyecha me'ata v'yad olam
Umeir es ha'olam
Matayom asim tovim ubechol meleches avodas avoyim umeir es ha'olam Matayom asim tovim ubechol meleches avodas avoyim.
We said yesterday, in a totally different context, quoting the Chafetz Chaim, when he heard Rav Meir Shapiro's proposal of the Daf Yomi and the Agudas Yisrael convention, he said he brought Mamash Simcha to Shemayim. And I'm just chilling. I got the chills here a little bit. I mean, well, figuratively and literally, watching everybody here, and just seeing you and feel, the nefesh of a tzaddik on some level in a Kabbalistic term is connected to the kever and what nachas ruach you're all giving to Shemayim in these instances and in your lifetimes. Yes. So this is Adam Chernyakov, who, rather than participate in the deportations of the Jews that commenced on our tragic day in history on Tisha B'Av, he took his life, and this is his grave. I know it's
Exactly. Zamenhof is from Białystok. He ended up in Warsaw.
That's where my
before
grandmother's
war.
from.
Yes. And what his idea was?
Oh, Zamenhof, of course.
I-
We went. He was born in Tiktin. I'm not connecting. Thank you.
Exactly.
Last year, you might recall, we went to the plaque outside of his house. He's the founder of the world language Esperanto. Not a religious person, but Esperanto is a language that was meant to be a language of humanity that he founded. There's still people who speak it in the world, and it was a Jew, of course, who founded it. And we saw the plaque of his origins in Tiktin. Yeah.
Simply this was his idea that maybe people can unite. There will be no war if we all speak the same language. And he mixed up all different languages to make Esperanto. And he was by profession a doctor, a medical doctor.
Right.
Yes.
But he was not a linguist per se, but this was his idea.
Yes, and 3 million people still speak this language.
Yola is very passionate and spoke to us at length earlier about the importance, among other things, to speak Hebrew, to understand
yes, it's very
people.
important to learn Hebrew. To learn Hebrew is very important
Because
this is connection to the Am Israel. Really, the language is the tool and is heritage. You have to have this heritage, because if you read the Tanakh in Hebrew, this is the coming from there. And if you look at Zionists who has idea about renewing the language, they didn't think, okay, we will make a new language from something, from nothing. They knew we have to go to something what unite all Jews, Sephardics and Ashkenazis. So we will not go to Yiddish, not to Ladino. We will go to Hebrew.
So you should all know that Yola just gave every last one of you intense musar. Be embarrassed right now if you don't speak Yas Lashon HaKodesh.
Yes, you must.
How do you say hello in Esperanto?
I need Musak. I don't know. And then they brought from the Catholic.
This woman discovered only later in her life that she was actually Jewish, and they brought her to be buried in the Jewish cemetery.
You see Elena? You read to me Elena?
No, I don't see that. Believe
Says
me.
the story, man. It's Ali Statel.
What?
A Jew forced to live and die under a false Christian identity as Stefania Rudica during the Nazi German occupation, never forgotten by her family. She now rests triumphantly among her people. She died in 1943. They exhumed her body and reburied her here. Yeah. So anybody been to Yad Vashem knows that there's a whole wing called the Children's Memorial, and it's dedicated to Janusz Korczak, who was somebody in the Warsaw Ghetto who stayed till the very end with the orphans. There were so many Yesomim who lingered, and he reached out to the children. I'll let Yola take over. She just asked me a trick question. You know, was he Jewish? Was he Janusz Korczak?
Yes.
Was he Jewish? Was he Polish?
Yes, what was the rabbi? He was Jewish or he was Polish?
No.
It sounds like a Polish name.
And what the
It
rabbi?
sounds like a trick question.
What's the name?
Janusz Korczak. This is exactly how history can be twisted. Yes, we have this person who is Janusz Korczak, is very famous because he was in ghetto Warsaw with his children, and when there was the deportation from the ghetto to Treblinka, he was permitted to stay behind because he was already very famous, because he was also by profession a doctor, and also he was already very sick. He was almost 60, but in spite of that he decided, I will walk with my children who I care for all my life to the very end. And even when they went to the wagon of train, they didn't say to children that this is going to the death town. He said, we are going for picnic. Please bring you the best toy so you can play. Yes, and all those years, I think that this was up to middle of 90s. There's always the Janusz Korczak Polish hero, and that's true. He's Polish hero because he is very famous in education. He's the first who, in beginning of 20th century, said that child is a human in small bodies. So it means you have to treat the children with respect as adults.
Rav Yeshua Salanter, the head of the Muslim movement, said you have to speak to he always spoke to children in the formal plural. We don't have that in English, but atem wotzim, which is great covered. He spoke to children like that. He said if you take a child's toy away from him, or you take his bath boats that he has in the bath, it's like sinking the yacht of an adult. That's how seriously they take it. We should take them seriously.
Yes. So exactly. So what's his real name?
Here's Goldschmidt.
Hirsch Goldschmidt. Yes. And how we came that everyone knows Janusz Goldschmidt and no one knows that he is really Hirsch Goldschmidt, because he was a doctor and he had the idea to put the orphanage. This was the first biggest orphanage in Warsaw for Jewish children, because there's a lot of hungry children. And this was already 1910. He was in Anglia. He had seen how the orphanages are run, and he put the orphanage. And then he started to write the story for children. The King Matatiahu is the first, he's the most famous one, and he said, I have to have the nickname. That's why he took that. Janusz Korczak, it was his nickname. No, Janusz is the name. Surname is Korczak.
It's not a Jewish name.
Exactly, so that's why he was always treated as Polish hero. Yes.
Obviously he wasn't a Shomer Torah mitzvos, and Zach. Yes, right. But you hear some of the values of Klal Yisrael. Certainly, he retained. Certainly, some of the midos that he retained. The statue, obviously, Zach pointed out.
The statue is only the statue to show that this is.
But in terms of halacha, it's totally forbidden. We're not allowed to have a human image in a statue, so it's something that we would never see in a proper Jewish cemetery. But it does reflect that Warsaw was a cemetery of the Jewish world, and it does reflect the degree of assimilation of this population, especially in the last couple centuries.
And this is only commemoration of Janusz Korczak.
Right.
He perished with all children in Treblinka.
In other words, he was one that took a one-way train to Treblinka. It's just a commemoration.
Exactly. And I just want to bring this story of Janusz Korczak because you have been in Krakow, and in Krakow there was a very similar story. There was also a big orphanage, and was led by a person who was David Alter Kurtzman, and he was from Hasidic Belz. And he also, when there was deportation from ghetto Krakow to Camp Berger, he was permitted to stay behind. And he decided, I will go with my children. And David Alter Kurtzman and all the staff from his orphanage in Krakow also went with children to the death camp in Belgium.
Belgium's one of the 6 death camps.
This was the really big sacrifice.
Let's yeah. Treblinka is northeast of Warsaw. We drove it was about an hour north. We drove from here last year to Treblinka. We went to Treblinka last year, and it was really just devastating in a way that Auschwitz and Majdanek were almost sanitized or a little bit like overly. Treblinka is, as I keep saying, it was just the space that you're just conscious that 1 million people just went and gone. And the cruelty, the stories that came out of Treblinka were devastating.
They didn't have like barracks for sleeping or anything? Or
No, it was a one-way train. They simply funneled everybody in a long, big walled corridor, outside corridor, down the path to the gas chambers. They stripped them and killed them. I remember the sign, remember what it said, the pasuk right outside the actual gas chambers? Zeh Shar Lashem Tzadikim Yavovo, trying to even strip them of their emunah in their last moments. But it was almost nobody survived Treblinka. It was it. That you just went for your death. I mentioned that was the father who was the kappa who asked for meisels in Auschwitz.
Is that okay to think about?
Well, no, not a korban, but he said this will be my personal akedas Yitzchak. In other words, in keeping to halacha, that's fine. And he understands he's giving, he's obeying the halacha and not being able to manipulate and choose to save his son at the expense of another yid, which you can't do that kind of a thing. Shev al ta'aseh, you have to, mi emar de damadu gav sumuk tfeif, the sugya who says that his blood's redder than his blood, we can't play these fateful decisions. And accepting that and realizing that meant the life of his son almost certainly, he was then declaring that his own is.
This is a wall from the Warsaw Ghetto?
There's a major difference that people note during the period that we call the Shoah or the Holocaust. The Western European Jews fared much worse than their Eastern European counterparts, because the Western European Jews were more assimilated, more acculturated, and felt that they had a future in non-Jewish society, and were devastated when they thought that the Jewish solution, led to the same end as all the religious Jews. They also, being a little more pampered and a little more used to the high lifestyle, the being stripped of their possessions, of their ranks, of their identities on some level was more devastating. We have, interesting statistic, a much higher suicide rate among Jews from Germany and the Netherlands and France than the Eastern European counterparts in Poland and Russia, because they were used to the persecution. They knew how to smuggle things in the black market. That's what Yola was just saying. These kids were street smart kids who could get food in and out. I have a story, if we have time later on, about one such kid, Yitzchak Milchberg, who was like 12-year-old dynamo who came in and out of the Warsaw Ghetto, and he actually they gave him frequent flyer points for the many times that he went inside and outside the Warsaw Ghetto at risk of his own life. I'm kidding, but you hear the idea. And the real difference is that those in the East had much more likely a strong internalized bitachon. If you have Kadosh Baruch Hu with you, your chances, your odds of survival through all these ordeals is exponentially greater. Just a couple of stories, overwhelmingly Yes. No? In Treblinka there was an uprising. What was the story?
Tovim,